Hi, my name is Jakub. I'm front-end developer at Frontend House, and this is Expert Zone. Usually at Frontend House, we try to break down some important technical topics so that you can write better code. But today will be a bit different, as today I'll be talking about the weirdest programming languages. So without further ado, let's jump in. So just before I get to the list of the weirdest programming languages, I'd like to introduce you to a concept of Esolangs. And Esolangs are languages that are designed to be unique, difficult to program in, or just plain weird. And you'll see that I have some really weird languages on my list today. The first language that I would like to talk about is the chicken language. And its uniqueness comes from that you can only use one keyword to write its code, and it's chicken. And let's jump into the documentation, and I'll show you how to write hello world with it. As you can see, I've jumped to esolangs.org, which is a Wikipedia for all the esoteric languages. Some of them, unfortunately, don't have their own pages, but Esolang is there to save the world and contain the documentation of all the weirdest programming languages. And as you can see, there's a bit of the documentation here. And this is basically how the hello world looks like. The way that this language works is that depending on how many chickens you write in one line, a different instruction will execute. So you can see that, for example, if we type only one chicken in our line, then this will push the string chicken onto the stack. And there are a couple of instructions that you can use. And this is how the complete hello world looks like. As you can see, it's quite lengthy. There are also other examples that we can find on this page. Like, for example, the cat program. The cat program prints our input. There are also a couple of more examples of different programs written in chicken. And there's also a section for mini chicken, which is basically a simplification to the chicken language, in a manner that instead of typing the chicken 20 times in one line, you can just say 20 and then 5 and then 0, and this will execute some program. On the internet, you can also find a compiler for the chicken language, and it's unfortunately on Web Archive, but well, you can still play with it. And we have the exact same source code for the Hello World program, and we can run it on the web, and it will output Hello World. You can also try other programs like the Quine program, which will just output chicken. So if we just type chicken in the chicken language, then it will output chicken. You can also play with like the cat programs, so we can modify it a little bit, and then it will output our input. There's also like a 99 chickens program. Let me type 100 here, and it will output hundreds of chickens for me, as you can see. Now, you might be wondering why anyone in the world would make a chicken language, and there's a paper explaining it. It's also worth noticing that the chicken language is 14 years old now, and there's a paper prepared by Doug Zonger that explains why he created the chicken language. And there are very useful information here, as you can see. There are also graphs explaining the process. Yeah, just 3 pages of pure knowledge, as you can see. A lot of interesting things. You can see some binary computations here. You can also see the math behind the chicken language, explaining everything to you. Some nice graphs as well. Yeah, so this is basically why the chicken language was created. There's also an interesting presentation on YouTube that further explains the topic of why the chicken language is created, and I highly recommend you watching that. The link will be in the description. It's really fun. I was enjoying myself really when I was watching it, and I hope you will too. And that would be it for the chicken language. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to, you can play with it online. You can maybe try to write some programs on your own. It was too difficult for me to modify its code, but maybe you'll be a little better than me. And now let's jump into the second language, which is the Shakespeare language. And the idea behind Shakespeare language is to make the code of your programs look like a Shakespeare play. Now I'm showing you the original Shakespeare programming language document. As you can see, it's even older than the chicken language. This one is 21 years old. And in the original documentation, everything is really neatly explained, but it's kind of difficult to grasp. But as we can see, we have a Hello World example, which is probably the longest Hello World that you will ever see. And it really does look like a Shakespeare play. So we have Romeo and we have Juliet, and they are on a journey to print Hello World for us. If you want to learn more about Shakespeare programming language, then I highly recommend going to the shakespeareland.com website, which is a refreshed version of the previous website. And you can basically see everything that has been created that comes from the community of Shakespeare language. If you want to play with it on your computer, then I recommend going to the Shakespearelang Python interpreter. Also features things like debugging and so on, so you can really write code in it. Maybe not production code, but well, it's doable at least. Now I would like to show you how the online interpreter written in Python works like. And as you can see, I have a couple of Shakespeare language files stored on my laptop. And you can see that it's basically the same code for the Hello World program that we've seen on the website. And I can use the Shakespeare compiler to type Shakespeare run hello SPL, and it will actually print the Hello World for us. There's also another program that I found on the internet, which is primes. We just input some number, and it will print prime numbers up to that number, all written in the Shakespeare language, which is awesome. The source code for primes looks somewhat like this, which is actually looks a bit shorter than Hello World example, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, you can dive deeper into this language if you want to. The basic idea is that if, so this is for example one sentence, and the clue is that if we say speak your mind in a line, then this will print something to the user. And there are lots of different instructions that look like sentences from plain English that do different things in this language. You can see that, for example, a lot of exiting and entering of different characters, and this means basically introducing new variables to the scope of our program. But what is actually really cool about the interpreter that I've showed you is that it also features debugging. Now let me modify the Hello World example a little bit. And how in the play would you actually state that you want to pause the program execution? Well, you would say a pause. So this is basically our debugger statement. And now I can use the Shakespeare interpreter and type debug. And then hello SPL. And as you can see, up to the point of my pause, we've managed to print 4 letters. Now I can type next, which will execute the next statement. And as you can see, a lot of things happen here. You can see a couple of speak your minds here. And this actually prints the letter W for us. And also I believe it printed the white space. So this one actually prints white space, and this one actually prints the letter W. And that would be it for the Shakespeare lang. It's interesting, and if you write any programs with the Shakespeare langs, please don't hesitate to share it. Another language on my list of the weirdest programming languages is Lolcode, and well, you just have to see it for yourself. The documentation for Lolcode, you can visit it at lolcode.org. It has a couple of things here. So this is a Hello World example in Lolcode. Every Lolcode program has to start with hi and then point to the version of Lolcode, and also has to end with k thanks bye. This can has stdio is a way to import libraries, and whenever we type visible, it will print the string we're supplying. And you can see that we have an interpreter that we can download, but first let's go to the language page. And this explains how to do all sorts of different things in this language. And you can see, for example, how to declare a variable. You do so by saying I has a var, and then btw is the way to write comments in your code. If you want a multi-line comment, then this one begins with oh by the way, and then ends with TLDR. So it's an interesting way to write your programs, I'd say. As you can see, there's also examples of assigning values to our variables. So over here, we declare a variable var, and then var are free. It also explains here in the comment. Var is now yarn, which is a type in Lolcode, which you might know as string. And then we assign it the value of free. Also, there isn't number in this language, it's number. And you can see all different types that are supported in this language. There are numerical types, string types. There are also arrays, which I believe right now aren't specified. And yeah, you can do all sorts of different things in this language. And this language also has really, I'd say, rich community for a Esolang. There are people creating different kinds of programs in this language, and I would like to show you that. Through the website that I've showed you, you can access the mailing list of Lolcode. It isn't really that active, but it's active enough that it produced a couple of interesting programs. And let's run one of them using the LCI, which is Lolcode interpreter, that you can also download from the official page. And let's run the calculator program. And this one is interesting because it actually supports 2 languages. It supports English and Polish. Let's pick English. And then it will print a nice message for us. Welcome in the calculator, input first number. Let's input 10. For the second number, I'll choose 2. And then we can choose the operation. The supported operations right now are add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Let's subtract. And it will print 8. So it's a fully working calculator using the Lolcode programming language. And let's also see what are the contents of this calculator. And as you can see, there are some variables created here. We also have some visible statements. So this would be our if-else, I believe. So whenever we say, oh really? And we say, yeah, really, then it means that this code will execute. And this is our else statement, which is no way. And this would be actually, I believe, our switch case statement, which is interesting. A lot of things are supported in this language. So many things are supported in this language that actually someone prepared a ray tracing program that renders images. Someone written a program that renders images in Lolcode, which is kind of interesting, I believe. I tried running this program, but I don't know if it works because, well, Lolcode probably isn't the fastest language that you can use. To render a single image, it took the author of the program 40 hours to render. So if you want to check out if it works, you can try running it on your own. But yeah, it will take a couple of days. The next language on the list is Brainafck, and the idea behind it was to create a language that needs the smallest possible compiler, and the compiler for Brainafck is only 240 bytes, and this results in the code looking really weird. So this language actually turns out to be really difficult to program in, a lot more difficult than the other programming languages that I've been showing you. So these are, I believe, all the possible words or signs that you can use to write your code in Brainafck. And there's a example of Hello World program, which has all the things explained. And this is actually the minified form of the Hello World program. And, well, you can't really say what's going on here without at least putting it to that form. And even if you see it like that, it's, I think, too difficult to understand. There's an online interpreter for Brainafck, which you can see here. And you can try running some different programs here. And this will, for example, print this string. Let's try copying the Hello World program. And yeah, it printed Hello World in 7 milliseconds. Let's maybe try a bit more functional program. And this is a cat program written in Brainafck, so let's try it out. And I believe you input something here. And yeah, it did work. It also prints a lot of O's for us, but it does the job. Now you may not be expecting to see JavaScript on this list. And, well, JavaScript is in Esolang, right? It's a language that is used in business all across the world, so it shouldn't be an Esolang, right? But then there's something like JSFAQ, which is very similar to Brainafck in a manner of how the code looks like, but you'll see for yourselves. So this is a website for this language, and this is basically what the example code in JSFAQ looks like. And it's basically different signs that you can use in JavaScript, like, for example, opening parentheses and closing it, or then exclamation mark. And this is based on what we type here, so we can slightly modify it. So right now it contains 2,345 characters. I'll encode it, and you can see that the number of characters has changed. You can also run this, and this will print an alert onto our browsers. We can also test it by opening console, printing it over here, and you will also see that it works. So you might be wondering why it works. And it works because this code here is a valid JavaScript. So potentially every piece of code that you write in JavaScript, you could compile into this version And the idea behind it is to create the most obfuscated, minified, it's not really minified because, look, for just a couple of characters that we typed here, we have already 2,372 characters, which is quite a lot, I'd say. So it's just obfuscating the code. There's a section explaining how it exactly works. And this contains all the basics. And as you can see, the way it operates is, for example, if we use an array, but also say exclamation mark at the very start, it will convert that value to Boolean. And if you want to, for example, say function, and then it will actually create a function for us. Well, JavaScript is weird, yeah. There's also a full list containing all the different hints on how this language, or how maybe how the compiler for JSFAQ works. And as you can see, if we want to print a specific letter, then we can, for example, use this piece of code. This will print the letter H for us. And now let's actually pick something different. So this piece of code prints the letter F because, well, we're casting false to string and then picking the first element from array, which is the letter F. And we can also use this piece of code instead of our false, and it will also print the same letter. And we can basically, that's the way this language operates. So whenever there's a piece of our code, it transforms everything using those references to, well, you've seen what it creates. The last language that I have for you isn't actually a Esolang. It's more of a concept of a language, and it's C+ equality. And let's jump into its documentation. C+ equality is a bit different from all the other languages that I've spoken about. The documentation states that it's the world's first feminist programming language, and it approaches some of programming concepts in a different way. The documentation is quite lengthy, and I cannot explain everything that happens here, but as you can see, we don't have some of our basic keywords. So for example, instead of private, we have to say privileged. Instead of printf, we have to say yell. We don't also have classes. We only have social constructs. We cannot also tell a library that we have to include them. We have to tell our program that it can consider importing a language. Some of the most interesting things about C+ equality is that, well, it would be really a mess if we, for example, created a variable and then told it that it has to be a string. Or maybe this variable has feelings and it actually doesn't feel as a string. Maybe it wants to be a number in the future. Who knows? And this language allows that. So whenever you create a variable and you say that it's a string, it has a 50% chance, I believe, of converting to a different type. Another thing is that we, for example, cannot tell the code that it has to go to a line. Instead, we tell the program that it might consider a jump, which is obviously a much better approach. Another interesting thing is that we don't have booleans because, well, not everything is binary. Instead, we have a concept called the boolean plus, and you can see how it basically works. The last thing that I'd like to talk about regarding the C+ equality is the debugging section, which states that there are no bugs, there are only snowflakes. and that there are no bugs in this language, and to suggest otherwise is offensive. Overall, there are a lot of funny things in this documentation, and if it fits your type of humor, then I recommend going to check it out. There are also a couple of more languages that are interesting, and you can discover them on your own. The first one is the Chref language. Works in a similar way that the Shakespeare language does. Shakespeare language wanted to make the code look like a Shakespeare's play, while the Chref language wants to make the source code look like a recipe, which is interesting. There's also ArnoldC. It's a language that only allows one-liners of Arnold Schwarzenegger's in its code. You can also check that out. There's also omgrofl, which is very similar to Lolcode actually. And the last one is lit, which is also a similar fashion of Lolcode, but a bit different. Thank you, that would be it for today's episode. Don't forget to check our website, frontendhouse.com. And also, if you haven't just yet, go and watch that video presentation regarding the chicken language. Thank you.